'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings all hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all safe in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads.
Wait, what? What are you talking about? With that being said, I just want to try to ramp this up just a notch. I'm going to show you a few things that hopefully really just kind of bake your bagel, so to speak, or toast your peppermint stick and really melt it down. So we're going to go through a little bit of the real history of Christmas. It's kind of a mess, really. We've borrowed so many things from so many different people that, honestly, I just don't know that we can really say that it's ours anymore. I don't know that we can honestly say that it's something that we should cherish and consider just the most fantastic, fantabulous thing. So let's kind of go through that. Now, it has a really long history. Not going to lie to you. This has been going on for several centuries. It was banned a few times. A king in England decided that he would get rid of it. There were folks in the United States that they would decide to ban it because they thought that it was just ruining people. The Puritans tried to get rid of it because they felt like, the Bible doesn't talk about Christmas, therefore why celebrate Christmas? You should only do what the Bible says. So you just kind of going along with that. And can we honestly say that the Christmas that we celebrate today is the Christmas that we were meant to be celebrating? Is the Christmas that we celebrate today with all of the shop lights, the Christmas trees, the Yule log, the whole idea of going out there and buying as many presents as possible for people who may not even deserve them seems a bit excessive, a bit consumeristic, a bit, I don't know, on the side of more of Satan than Santa, if you will. I mean, after all, Santa is an anagram for Satan. So, maybe that was a whole twist on the whole idea to kind of steal value away from the idea that Christ was born, and maybe more towards the idea of, hey, you're not cool unless you're giving gifts to everybody, and make yourself broke and go into an incredible amount of debt unless you do so. I mean, it's how many families go into so much debt over Christmas. It's ridiculous. It's just out of control. So again, just trying to ruin Christmas here. Dr. Evil, just trying to do my thing. So one of the things that you kind of have to put out there is some of our modern Christmas traditions. They have a lot of older roots, and most of them are actually pagan on top of everything else. The middle of winter is a long time, and this celebration around the world, and part of it is because we see so much less of the sun. It's cold, it's dark, it's damp. It's kind of an excuse for a party. You really want to find some kind of element, some issue, something to celebrate during the coldest, darkest month of the year. And unless you're in Australia, then it's kind of the warmest, greatest month of the year. So totally different issue. Now, centuries before the arrival of Jesus, early Europeans were already celebrating something that was, the light and birth of the darkest days of winter. So most of them rejoiced during winter. They enjoyed the winter solstice. They were trying to throw some kind of just magic happiness into one of the shortest days of the year. Now, in Scandinavia, they celebrated the Yule from December 21st, the winter solstice, all the way through into January. Now, one of the things they would try to do is actually trying to they thought they had some kind of control over the return of the sun. So they would be celebrating, and they'd bring home these giant, huge logs that they would then set on fire. Now, today, the modern interpretation of that is, these neat little candy cake kind of configurations. Some people even go so far as to put the Yule log fire on their HD TV in order to imitate the fireplace that they don't really have. I mean, how sad is it that we've gotten to the point that in order to continue to celebrate some kind of a pagan festival, we're willing to put it on our television screen and watch it for hours on end. Now, The people would then feast until the log fully burned out, which would take as many as 12 days. 12 days. What's that sound like? Oh, wait, the 12 days of Christmas. Remember that whole partridge in a pear tree, 4 calling birds, 3 French hens, geese a laying, swans a swimming, maids a milking, ladies dancing, lords a leaping, 11 pipers, 12 drummers drumming. That's right, it's a big 12-day party, booze fest with food. Now, the Norse believed that each spark from the fire represented a new pig or calf that would be born during the coming year. So all this time, while you're sitting there enjoying the crackle of the fire, what you're really doing is celebrating the birth of a whole bunch of pigs and cows. How's that for fun? Now, the end of December was kind of the perfect time for this in most areas of Europe, simply because, again, it's so stinking dark. Who doesn't want to have a nice warm fire? Not to mention, at that time of the year, most cattle were being slaughtered so that they would not have to be fed through the winter months. Again, they didn't have a means of making sure that all those cattle were fed. So this is going to be like the only time of the year when they'd actually have a fresh supply of meat. You ever wonder where that whole idea of the giant Christmas fest came from? It came from this. In fact, they even created all kinds of songs about the whole idea as well. Now, in addition, most wine and beer happen to be fully fermented by that time of the year, so it was actually ready for drinking. All the beer and wine was ready to go. Just a little side note, that whole song about jingle bells, most people only know a couple of stanzas. The rest of the song actually lays out basically how this guy goes to pick up this girl, they fall over, they're slipping and sliding because they've been drinking. The vast majority of hymns that are sung in most churches, the older ones in particular, had actually been converted Irish drinking songs. Don't believe me? Look it up. Germany, people honored the pagan god Odin during the midwinter holiday. Who's not afraid of a little Odin? You know, people want to get into a little Thor action, so to speak, and I'm not talking about the guy who was on the Marvel characters. Now, Germans were terrified of Odin because they believed that he made a nocturnal flight, that's at night. And he would observe his people and then decide who would prosper and who would perish. And because of his presence, many people chose to stay inside. Just a friendly reminder, you ever wonder about that whole fat dude flying over the city who's making a list, checking it twice, gonna find out who's naughty and nice? And then, of course, that great aspect of Christmas legends that come straight out of Germany because they create all things weird. Yes, that's for you, Katie. Who is Krampus? The legend of the devilish Krampus, brought about by German folklore, was out to go and capture all the naughty children. So where Santa was trying to reward them, we added Krampus to go get all the bad kids. Now, Romans, Greeks, they really know how to party. So one of their things they decided to come up with was Saturnalia. Now that sounds fancy, but basically it's where they're going to sit there and throw a party, especially those individuals who lived in the far north, in honor of Saturn, a planet, as well as the god of agriculture. Now, they celebrated him as a way of, like, in that first week of the winter solstice, and they continued for the full month. So they partied for the entire month of December. Now, it was an entirely hedonistic time. Food and drink were plentiful, and the normal Roman social order was turned upside down. So peasants were in charge. It was completely crazy. Now, in the Charles Dickens classic, A Christmas Carol, where this character plays out is actually the ghost of Christmas Present. Many of the lines that are captured in that great classic tale are pulled from these older traditions. Now, Rome, again, it's upside down. For a month, the slaves would become the masters. Peasants were in command of the city. Businesses and schools were closed so that everyone could join in on the fun. If you remember from A Christmas Carol, Scrooge and Marley, Scrooge is moaning about the fact that they have to shut down for a day in order to celebrate Christmas. Now, this, again, it carries forward in so many of our modern traditions. They started all the way back during these time periods. If you don't understand the history of Western civilization, you're going to kind of miss out on some of the weird, funny, and unique aspects of our history. Also, around that time of winter solstice, the Romans observed a different kind of feast. It was called Juvenalia, a feast honoring the children of Rome. You ever wonder where the term juvenile came from? How about the phrase juvenile delinquent? Yeah, all the kids sitting there being naughty during this time period because they could get away with pretty much anything. Now, in addition, members of the upper classes often celebrated the birthday of Mithra, the god of the unconquerable sun, on December 25th. Now, keep in mind, this is where it's only been a few days since the shortest day of the year, and now we start to see that the length of the days is getting longer, and so they're celebrating, oh, look, Mithra, this god who was born out of a rock, is absolutely able to conquer even this short time period. Things that also come out that are kind of interesting is the whole idea of when they deified Nimrod, you'll find that he has a deer and a pine tree captured in his imagery. Some of the same imagery is also carried over for Mithra. Ever wonder where they got the whole image of Santa Claus holding the tree, flying with reindeer? Now, it's believed that Mithra, as an infant god, literally was born out of a rock. And for some Romans, Mithra's birthday was actually the most sacred day of the year. So it only makes sense that in the early years of Christianity, where Easter had been the main holiday, the birth of Jesus was not celebrated. So they wanted to try to tie into these other celebrations. How do they get more people to adopt Christianity, embrace it as an idea, embrace it as a faith? Well, around the 4th century, the church officials decided to institute the birth of Jesus as a holiday. In fact, the problem that they found was that the Bible doesn't mention when that happened. There's not an official date for that. And again, the Puritans would later point out that this was why you shouldn't celebrate Christmas, because there was no legitimacy for that celebration found in the Bible. Now, there is evidence that suggests that his birth may have occurred actually in the spring. I mean, why else would the shepherds be herding in the middle of winter? That's not something that you do. So Pope Julius I, he chose December 25th to be the day when this would actually be celebrated. In fact, it was 336. Now, this is the time during the Emperor Constantine. He's out having a good time, and he is considered the first Christian Roman emperor. The whole Nicene Creed and everything else, they came out during the time period of Constantine. I won't go into some of those other issues that happened during the time period. That's for a later podcast. A few years later, the Pope officially declared that the birth of Jesus would only be celebrated on December 25th. Now, it's commonly believed that the church chose this date in an effort to adopt and absorb the traditions of the pagan Saturnalia festival. Not to mention, to allow people who did celebrate Mithra, who did celebrate these other gods, can now see, oh, maybe it wasn't really that what they were celebrating was the right avenue. Maybe this other god, this Jesus, was who they were supposed to be celebrating. And so they would tie that in as effectively as possible in order to help move the movement forward. Now, first called the Feast of the Nativity, the custom spread to Egypt by 432 and to England by the end of the 6th century. By the end of the 8th century, the celebration of Christmas had spread all the way to Scandinavia. At the same time, you have to take a look at what was going on with the spread of Islam. The spread of Islam was actually going as far into Liberia, Madrid, Tripoli, Egypt, all across Persia, areas of that nature. And so the Christian faith was going to start running head to head into the Muslim faith and would cause all kinds of problems later on, some of which are still carrying forward today. Now, the Greek and the Russian Orthodox churches, they actually celebrate Christmas a little bit differently. They celebrate it 13 days after the 25th, which is also referred to as the Epiphany, or the Three Kings Day. Now, this is when they believe that the three wise men or the three kings actually showed up to see Christ. There are others who identify that maybe this happened about 2 years later. So there's still a bit of controversy on this. But again, the Greek and the Russian Orthodox, who have been celebrating this aspect of the holiday far longer than any other church, they all believe this is the time period. Now, it's also believed that when they brought this, they brought 3 specific gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The gold was to signify Jesus' kingship. The frankincense was a symbol of prayer. It signified Jesus as a high priest, a mediator between God and man. And then also myrrh, which is a burial ointment. Now, this is almost a foreshadowing. Some people call these types of Christologies, these foreshadowings, prophecy that Jesus was going to have to die for salvation of all, hence the gift for one who would die. Now, at the same time, these gifts would be used to help Joseph and Mary and Jesus escape, because Herod is out there trying to kill babies. So it would allow them to escape over to Egypt in order to save their own lives. Now, by holding Christmas at the same time as a traditional winter solstice festivals, the church leaders increased the chances that Christmas as a holiday as its own would be popularly embraced, but it gave up the ability to dictate how it would be celebrated. Now, one of the things that kind of shows up that most people totally forget about is, like, what are some of the symbols even in Christmas? I mean, we have the whole idea, like, why do we have this stupid tree? Well, Germans believe that the world was held on the branches of a tree called God Odin. So each winter solstice, they worship the tree by decorating it with torches. Now, it's said that St. Boniface knocked down the tree, planted a pine, symbol of God's everlasting love, hence the evergreen tree that we use, and he decorated it with apples, the apples being a symbol of sin, and candles, the light of Christ. So nowadays, the apples have been replaced with those cute little bubbles, the bulbs that you hang on there. And beyond that, the whole tradition moved across Europe as a result of it. The star represents that the king is born. Candy canes, you'll find, represents the shepherd's staff. Gifts representing the gold, frankincense, and myrrh that the wise men brought. That evergreen tree, again, a symbol of eternal life. Christmas carols representing the multitude of angels that sang on Christmas night that Jesus was born. Candles representing that Jesus brought and became the light of the world. Holly berries representing the blood that Christ shed for us. The whole nativity scene represents that whole birth in the manger scenario. Christmas wreath actually represents the crown of thorns that Jesus wore when he was crucified. And even Christmas bells have a symbol. They represent the call of mankind to worship the Lord. So I say all of this to point out that, is Christmas a pagan holiday? Kind of. Is Christmas a holiday that should be celebrated? Absolutely. What Christ did for us, what Christ brought to us as not only a symbol of peace and hope for all of mankind, it's a symbol of grace and generosity. When we give gifts, honestly, it's far better if you give a gift that you made instead of a gift that you bought. That gift shows your love and that you took time and consideration to pour a part of who you are into it for that family member. And the exchanging of gifts, again, harkens back to the wise men who brought gifts. All of these symbols are powerful at this time of year when so many people have suffered under the whole COVID-19, whether by the disease, the lockdowns, or whatever else. It's my hope that this year, more than any other year, you will be able to answer the questions of, is Christmas pagan? You can answer, kind of. Many of its traditions did have pagan roots, but that doesn't mean that where it was and where it is today are the same. We just said, hey, that's a great idea, but we think that it should be a symbol of this rather than that. As Christians, as we go out and as apologists, and we try to encourage people to celebrate Christmas, please keep in mind each symbol has meaning, it has power, and who you are as a Christian shines through to all of these other folks. This is a season of charity. This is a season of love. And this is a season of when each of us should be desperately trying to just care for one another more than perhaps we ever have before. That being said, Merry Christmas, Feliz Navidad, Ledig Jul, God rejoice. Merry Christmas.